Question number 2, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Does he stand by all of his statements on GST?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
We'll get to him in a minute. Mr. Speaker, yes, I do. And if somebody asked me whether I would want to raise GST to cover deficits, the answer then would be no, and it remains no today.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question. On what basis does he claim a mandate for increasing GST when he explicitly promised the nation that he wouldn't do so?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I never made that promise. What I said was I wouldn't raise GST to cover deficits, and we're not.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I seek the leave of the House to table this DVD where the Prime Minister explicitly promises not to raise GST.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection.
A supplementary question, Mr.
The Honourable
Speaker.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister now admit to the country that he misled the country in promising not to raise GST to 15% and that he's broken his word?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, because my word was I wouldn't raise GST to 15% to cover deficits, and I won't.
Chris Tremain.
Supplementary question to the Prime Minister. Has he seen reports of people supporting a rise in GST, accompanied by compensation through tax cuts, increases in benefits and increases in superannuation?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes, as members will know, the Labor government in 1986 introduced GST at a rate of 10%, accompanied by personal tax reductions, increases in benefits and increases in superannuation. Mr. Speaker, at the time that proposal was greeted with enthusiasm by one person who said these words: "Every New Zealander will be better off under the proposals announced last night. It introduces a fairer system for New Zealanders. It reduces the burden of personal taxes which wage and salary earners have to." If the goods and services tax is such a bad system, why has the National Opposition not pledged itself to repeal it? It will not do so because it's not a bad system. Great little speech from Phil Goff back in 1986.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Order.
Mr. Speaker.
Order. 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 Now, members, a little decorum, please. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition called a point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. I seek the leave of the House to table this document which says National is not going to raise GST. National wants to cut taxes, not raise taxes.
Order. The member has not indicated to
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. This is today from stuff.co.nz.
Order.
Article by Tracy Watkins.
Order. The member knows that seeking leave to table stuff that's in the common media is no longer approved in the House. Supplementary question. Supplementary question. I'll come back to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, has the Prime Minister ever said that raising GST will not be necessary if National was doing a half-decent job in growing the economy? And is his decision now to raise GST an admission that National isn't even doing a half-decent job in managing the economy?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the question was, would I be required to raise GST to cover deficits? And the answer to that question is no, we won't. In fact, National won't be increasing taxes. National will be reducing taxes, which actually proves we're doing a really good job.
Chris Tremain.
Supplementary to the Prime Minister. Has the government ever raised GST without compensating people through tax cuts, benefit increases or superannuation increases?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes, actually, in 1989 the Labor government raised GST from 10% to 12.5% with no tax cuts, no increase in benefits, no increase in superannuation. People on lower incomes were left significantly worse off. That won't happen under a National government.
The Honourable Jim Anderton.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister now told, as Leader of the Opposition, New Zealanders at his media interview 18 days before the last election that, quote, National is not going to be raising GST, end quote, what did he mean by the word not? Or has he got a lot of other definitions that most of us don't understand?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I urge everyone to look at the video. The exact question was, would I raise GST to cover deficits? The answer to that question is no, will not be raising GST to do that.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Was the answer to that question...
Order. I apologise, Honourable Member. Is it a point of order? The
Speaker, I did ask the Prime Minister in that question a very simple point to explain to the House what his understanding of the word not was. I still hear the answer.
Order. I don't need any further help on the matter. The Prime Minister disputed in his answer the basis of the question the member was asking. I think he's perfectly entitled to do that. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Question, Mr. Speaker, further to the Prime Minister's answer to the last question. Was his answer, word for word, quote, National is not going to be raising GST. National wants to cut taxes, not raise taxes. Full stop.
Prime Minister.
Speaker, yes, because we are going to cut taxes, not raise taxes. And secondly, the question... look, I know it's a real downer for their story, but if I get asked a question, I answer it. Am I going to raise taxes and raise GST to cover deficits? The answer is no.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the facts are set out on the DVD that's being tabled.
Order. Ask both sides, please, to settle down a little. I've allowed a little. There's obviously a fiercely contested issue, and I've allowed a bit of noise and robustness. But please, as the member seeking to ask his question, could we have a little more order? The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, if the top tax rate is lowered from 38 to 30 cents, what percentage of the total spend of this tax package will go to the top 10% of income earners in that bracket?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have that answer to hand, but if the member wants me to go to IRD, I can get him the answer to that question. But what I would say is that what we do know is that 1 in 4 New Zealanders who are tertiary qualified live overseas. Now, the probability of someone who is tertiary qualified paying the top personal rate, given there are 300,000 New Zealanders paying the top personal rate...
Point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question was very specific, as you know. The Prime Minister answered that question by saying that apparently he didn't have that information. There's nothing else to add.
That's quite right.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition makes a fair point that he asked a question that was very specific following a very general primary question. The Prime Minister was very upfront and said obviously didn't have that particular information, and in fairness I do have to acknowledge that that actually should have been the end of the answer. Supplementary question, the Honourable Jim Anderton.
Mr. Speaker, under the policies he foreshadowed yesterday, which taxpayers will receive the highest dollar amounts per week in personal tax cuts, and will the same taxpayers be those who need the money the most?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we don't know yet because the tax package hasn't formally put together, but of course one would logically assume the highest taxpayers would receive the highest personal tax cuts, and that's because they pay the most tax.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, instead of giving the lion's share of the tax cuts to the very top income earners, why doesn't the Prime Minister bring in a package that gives fairer tax cuts to those on $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year, in line with his undertaking that this tax package would be fair to all New Zealanders?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, all I can say to the Leader of the Opposition is he's jumping to conclusions. He may find he's factually incorrect soon.
Question number... Point of order, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in one of my supplementary questions, the Prime Minister indicated he didn't have an answer, and that's a fair answer to a question. I wonder if the Prime Minister would provide that answer subsequently and retrieve it and give it to us.
It's not strictly a point of order that but I don't think the House's time should be taken. It's not a valid point of order. It's something you can pursue privately with the